Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Today, we read 3 stories from r/Library of Shadows. Let's begin. Our first story is from Axiled, The Hungry Little Creature. It was a dark and stormy night. At least, that is how they tell the story. In truth, it was at worst a bit humid, and the floodlights banished any fragment of dark that could creep into the fenced yard. 4 children had made tents there, all facing the illuminated patio doors. But as they say, it was a dark and stormy night. Each child huddled in the dark and creeping cold facing the electric fire pit. Their parents had already gone to bed, leaving the children to camp out in the creeping dark. The eldest yawned. The others were telling scary stories of ghosts and monsters. Finally, the story ended. If you thought that was bad, I have one that will keep you up at night. The eldest was giddy. There's no way you can beat Redcap. Yes, I can. Have you heard of the hungry creature? The children all looked at each other quizzically. The eldest grinned. What's that? Well, there was a little creature, and this little creature was hungry. That's stupid. Just shut up and listen. The creature was hungry. Its stomach rumbled. Not wanting to hunt, it wandered. In the distance, it heard a celebration. It looked through a window and could see a businessman. In front of him was a feast, more than could ever be eaten in one sitting. He rapped on the window. Tap, 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 tap. The businessman opened the window. Please, sir, I'm hungry. You have more than you could possibly eat, and I don't want to hurt anyone. The little creature pleaded. The businessman slammed his fist down.
Why should I feed you, little creature? Look at your sharp claws and teeth. You can find your own food.
I don't want to hunt, it replied.
I bought this food fair and square. I won't share my food. Go ask the butcher.
And the businessman slammed the window shut. And so the little creature went hungry. Wait, the creature didn't do anything? That's dumb. Just wait until the end. The little creature's stomach rumbled as he walked through the town. It could smell the fresh meat. It approached the smell of the fresh meat to find a butcher. The butcher was cutting it with a mighty cleaver. Please, sir, I am hungry. You have so much meat, and I do not want to hurt anyone. Can I have some of it? The butcher looked up, slamming his cleaver down. This is my job. I prepare this meat to be sold. If I give you some, everyone would want some for free. But sir, you throw some away. I could take the pieces you throw away, the creature pleaded. No, the butcher replied. With your sharp teeth and claws, you can get your own food. And so, the little creature went hungry. Why couldn't it just take some for itself? The children cried. This is the 3rd time you interrupted. Just wait until the end. The stomach of the little creature rumbled. It stumbled out of town, dragging each foot. Ahead, he heard the bang of a gun, and a hunter stood over a recently shot deer. "Please, sir, I am so very hungry. You deliver some meat to the butcher. Can you share some with me?" it pleaded.
"Why, look at you. Such sharp claws and sharp teeth. You could hunt for yourself. Why should I share my prey with you?"
The hunter lowered his rifle. "'Cause I'm hungry and I do not wish to hurt others. Please share some with me."
"No, go get some yourself. Even beggars can get their own food."
And so the little creature went hungry. The little creature's face started to sag, gaunt with hunger. Its stomach rumbled. Once again, it wandered through town. Ahead, it heard the jingle of a mostly empty can. A beggar lay before him. "Please, sir, I see that you have some food. Can you share a bite with me?" the little creature cried in pain. The beggar rolled his eyes over the creature.
"This is all the food I have. If I give you any, what would be left for me?"
"Please, I'm hungry. No one would share and I need to eat." The beggar sighed.
"No, go away."
The beggar kicked the little creature, and so the little creature went hungry. The creature cried, its stomach rumbling. "No one will share their food with me. I just want to eat." It dragged its feet out of the town and into the woods. It looked back to the town with waning eyes and disappeared into the dark trees. The businessman, the butcher, the hunter, and the beggar never saw the little creature again. The children waited expectantly. "That's it?" "That's it." "That's stupid. Why didn't it just take the food?" "Did it die in the woods?" "I mean, what's so scary about that? It didn't do anything." The eldest grinned, baring sharpened teeth. The little creature didn't do anything. But imagine what the other little creatures learned from him. Our next two stories are from PePsiLemoNN. Shadows of the Desert. He walked through the desert, sheltering his eyes from the raging sandstorm. It was evening, but faint light was still present to illuminate the path. He roamed the sandy floor of the desert, directionless, not knowing where he started from or where he was headed. Although the storm was not attacking his eyes and face, and the temperature was starting to drop, he was not worried about these things. What made his fear surface from deep within were the shadows. Shadows of the desert, which he recognized not by name nor by shape. They followed him. His every step was mirrored by something behind him, always oh so close. Labored breaths filled his lungs through the cloth which he used to cover his mouth and nose. After an unknown amount of time, through narrowed eyes that could barely resist the storm, he saw a cabin. He wasted no time to question why such a structure was in the middle of the desert, but hurried to enter. It was dark, as night had already set in by that point, and the whirlwind that surrounded the cabin did not let in the light of the moon. He explored the area, slowly walking around and reaching ahead with his hands, but he found nothing of particular interest. He sat down on the floorboards, by the wall opposite to the door. Though he could hear the rumbling outside and the millions of grains hitting the walls and windows, it was safe. Safe until he remembered the shadows. How could he forget about them? He instantly jumped to his feet and froze, barely able to see past the darkness. By closely scanning the windows, he could see them. They were waiting. He knew it. Oh, how they've waited for him to come out, to gnaw at his bones and feast upon his soul. They were shading the darkness itself with their malicious forms. Even with this knowledge, he thought that he was safe, as the shadows did not dare enter the wooden cabin, like he did not dare to sit back down. The storm seemed to intensify, and the number of sand grains that were hitting the walls multiplied infinitely, but the walls stood mightily against the grainy waves. Just as he started to relax, and maybe think about sitting back down to get some rest, the shadows approached the windows even more. They were inches away from the glass. The forms that cast the shadows could now be seen, and he froze once again. Pale, abhorrent creatures littered the front of the cabin, reaching for the windows with the black, sharpened claws. Oh, how they scraped against the windows, audible even above the thunderous storm. He could have sworn that he saw the head of a wolf watching him from atop a human torso, and tentacle-like appendages squishing against the door, with the growling of unknown beasts. He trembled in this place, unable to flee. Even if he was, where would he go? He couldn't go back into the abyss, as that were what the creatures were silently waiting for. At that moment, he had to make a decision. He knew that there was no escape, and the storm showed no sign of faltering. He had to confront the beasts that were stalking him with red eyes from beyond the sanctuary of the cabin. He rallied every bit of courage that the storm had not ripped from him. And yet, breaking out of this deathly freeze, taking a step towards the door, towards the unspoken depths of the creature's fury, oh, how their red eyes grew larger upon sight of his approach. He closed his eyes and took another step. But he felt something that was unusual. He looked down and spotted it, sitting on the floor with a faint shine. Mesmerized by the ray of light that happened upon the darkness of the cabin, he reached for it. He was surprised to find that it was not merely a ray of light, but an object, so he picked it up. When his fingers curled around it and raised it from the ground, the dim light burst into a brilliant golden nova, illuminating every corner of the room within its presence. He felt invigorated by the light. Concentrating for a mere moment, he willed it into the shape of a sword. With this newfound power at his side, he advanced towards the door. Beneath the glow, the creatures lost their forms and returned to the shadows. Then, with the sword in one hand, he placed the other on the doorknob and pulled it open. The storm dissipated within seconds of his emergence, and the entirety of the desert lit up with the sight of the sword. He was now ready to strike the creatures themselves, but when he looked around, he saw the creatures under the light. He had been deceived not by his eyes, but by his sight itself. He could see that the monsters, now fully illuminated, were no monsters at all, but some other kind of creature. They ranged from horses to rabbits to butterflies, all around him and the cabin. Then he looked down, expecting the sight of the coarse desert sand, but there was no sand at all. as there was no desert. The distant dunes were trees, filled with birds that happily chirped, and the sand below his feet was no sand at all, but soft grass and flowers. The sword did not dim. Instead, it lost its physical form and returned to a shard of pure light, which then proceeded to unite with the wielder's body. Paradoxically, even if the sword was gone, its glow remained to the grace of the world. Confident that his sight did not fool him this time, he laid down in the grass. Night walk. Leon had always loved late night walks. How the wind blew past his face. How the stars blinked at him from aeons past. And, most importantly, how there were no people around. No sounds of cars or passing people could distract him from his thoughts, especially in such a quiet neighborhood. He'd found by now that strolling about comes best in early summer evenings when it's warm enough, but the reigning summer temperatures have not fully set in yet. That night was no different. It was a night of particular beauty. He walked by the lampposts, only getting a few seconds inside each one's glow before he moved on to the next. The sound of his footsteps was only interrupted by the occasional owl, sometimes, but it was mostly quiet. Never having an exact destination, he walked at a slow pace. When he was almost home, he couldn't help but notice the window to his neighbor's basement. He thought that the flickering lights and the voices were odd, especially at that hour, but his neighbor had always been a bit odd. Although approximately of the same age, Leon didn't have much in common with the man, so each of them mostly kept to themselves. Now that he thought about it, he realized that they had only spoken once or twice in the years he'd lived here. But if socializing with his neighbors was his goal, he wouldn't go alone on walks late at night. Thinking nothing more of the strange events, he went inside his own house. It didn't take long for him to start thinking about the basement again. Not even he knew why he was so fixated on the idea, as there were hundreds of explanations for what he saw, and none of them included stalking his neighbor. Yet, there he was, not an hour after he'd finished his walk, sneaking into the backyard. Maybe he just left the light on by accident, he thought. But directionless guesses couldn't keep his curiosity at bay for long. Circling the house from behind, he noticed that his neighbor hadn't mowed his lawn very much lately. He didn't think much of it at the moment, as enjoying gardening was much more of a possibility than a probability. The enjoyment seemed to rise proportionally with one's age. At first, his idea of this operation had been simple. Get to the front, crouch down, and peek through the glass, followed by his neighbor's secrets being revealed before his eyes. He thought that his plan was perfect, as the neighbor couldn't see him from inside because of the light, if he was even there. But why would he spend so much time in the basement at such a late hour? Then he remembered the voices that he'd heard earlier while passing by. He wasn't scared of being caught, as the voices could well have been coming from somewhere inside the house. After a few more seconds, he got to the front of the house and approached the window. Crouching down, He gazed through the dirty glass, trying to make out what stood in the faint glow. He saw a few candles placed on the floor, forming a circle, from which the light came. There seemed to be nothing else besides boxes and old furniture, until he looked at the corner closest to the circle. A body. He couldn't make out the details, but he thought that it must be the neighbor himself. Collapsed, in need of help. Forgetting the questions that had started to arise in his head at first, he rushed inside the house. The squeak of the basement door gave way to an old set of wooden stairs. He took a moment to consider the strangeness of this situation, but his neighbor could be in need of some serious help, and every second mattered. He quickly descended, reaching the bottom in just a couple of seconds. The neighbor's body was lying limp in the corner, his face illuminated by the candles. He reached down to take his pulse. Impossibly, when his back was turned, the light of the candles grew tenfold in intensity, now lighting the room as if a light bulb were present. Just as he turned, the brightness started decreasing. Through eyes that could barely adjust to the roller coaster that was the light's power, he could make out a shape in the midst of the candles.
I see.
A deep voice came from the shape. The candles had finally returned to their normal light, and he could see what he had gotten himself into. A horned, shadowy creature had appeared before his very eyes. Its horns could nearly touch the ceiling, and shadow wings could barely be contained by the basement's walls.
You are right to be scared, mortal.
The creature boomed from up high. "Who are you?" Leon asked, curious no longer, but trembling.
Who? Are you curious for my name? Should you not be more concerned about what it is that sent your friend into his demise?
The creature replied in a calm yet thunderous voice. Although its face was only a silhouette made up of flowing shadows, Leon could feel the wickedness in this creature's gaze. He couldn't believe his eyes. There was a normal basement, filled with old stuff that nobody wanted, and besides, his neighbor's cold body stood what he presumed to be some kind of demon. He looked at the demon, and then glanced at the candles surrounding it.
Oh, do not think that I am bound to this puny ritual.
Seeing the demon had not done him harm yet, he mustered his courage. "What do you want?" he asked. The shadow stepped out of the circle in the candles, flames dying, leaving only the moon to light the basement. Upon its emergence from the circle, its body was made up of shadow no more, but held a physical form. Sharp teeth and yellow eyes made its gaze even harder to bear than before, and the horns on its head were now scraping against the ceiling. Although the moon was full, the light could barely reach Leon's eyes, being blocked by the demon's wings.
Flee, mortal, if only to warn the world of my arrival. Your demise may wait.
He then roared, pointing yellow eyes at the trembling figure before him. Leon thought he'd heard some kind of excitement in the creature's voice, but he did not linger to hear it again. Sprinting up the stairs, now even faster than he had descended upon the sight of his neighbor, he fled. The demon's physical manifestation was enough to make him run until he was out of the neighborhood. He now wished for the presence of other people, if only for the false feeling of safety that said presence would entail. Meanwhile, the demon exited the house, spreading its wings, and grinned.
How I have waited. this world shall embrace oblivion.
Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The stories here were read and slightly altered by the permission of their authors. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit posts. Don't let the shadows get too close.